The sound of glass shattering wasn't loud. It was delicate, like a whisper that broke the air and never stopped echoing. For one suspended moment, the ballroom froze. The orchestra hesitated mid-note, the laughter of Chicago's elite caught in their throats, and the woman at the center of it all, Ava Monroe, stood perfectly still, a crystal flute slipping from her fingers, fragments glittering at her feet like fallen stars. 30 seconds ago, she'd had everything. A fiancé whose last name could buy skylines, a reputation built on elegance and intellect, and a life that gleamed under museum lights. 30 seconds ago, she was the curator of beauty. Now she was the exhibit, raw, cracked, and staring at the ruin of her illusion. If you've ever had your heart break in public, if you've ever been betrayed in a place where you had to keep smiling, then stay. You're not just watching Ava's story, you're walking through it. And before we begin, if her silence, her fire, or her courage speaks to something buried in you, take a moment, like, comment, follow. Not for algorithms, but for every woman who's ever had to hold her head high while her world burned. The gala at the Art Institute of Chicago had been the event of the season, a symphony of champagne and couture beneath skylights and Monet's brushstrokes. Cameras flashed like lightning across a sea of sequins and tuxedos. Everyone who mattered was there. Collectors, critics, the city's power brokers. And at the top of the grand marble staircase, Ava Monroe had glided in on Julian Cross's arm, the perfect couple, all poise and polish, until the perfection cracked. She hadn't meant to wander. She'd only gone looking for Julian. He'd stepped away to take a call. The corridor she entered was quiet, hushed, lined with marble and moonlight from the glass ceiling above. Then she heard it, the kind of laughter that twists your stomach before your brain can name why. Julian's voice, low, intimate, followed by a sound that made the world tilt, a sigh that wasn't hers. Ava turned the corner and saw them. Julian, the man who'd proposed under the mirrored lights of Millennium Park, pressed against the wall with Lena Torres, her 24-year-old intern, his hands buried in the girl's hair, his mouth on her skin. For a heartbeat, there was no music, no air, only the reflection of that scene in the glass frame beside them, Ava's own face staring back, not angry yet, not weeping, just erased. The champagne glass slid from her hand. It struck marble and shattered, clear pieces scattering across polished stone. The sound sliced through the corridor like truth finally breaking free. Julian's head jerked up. His eyes widened, not with guilt, but irritation, as if she'd interrupted something trivial. Ava. She didn't wait to hear the rest. Her heels clicked in sharp rhythm against the marble as she walked back toward the music, her vision stinging but dry. If she cried now, she'd drown, so she kept walking, back into the glittering crowd, into the light and noise, carrying the silence inside her like a secret scream. The ballroom was alive again, music swelling, conversations floating, but Ava's world had narrowed to the weight in her chest. She could feel eyes turning as she appeared at the top of the stairs. The perfect woman, the curator of elegance. No one suspected she'd just watched her life collapse 3 rooms away. Julian's betrayal wasn't just a personal wound, it was a public demolition. The people below weren't friends. They were the city's eyes, waiting to feast on spectacle. And in that instant, something inside Ava shifted. The humiliation curdled into resolve. If she was going to fall, she'd do it in flames, not silence. That's when she saw him. A man standing alone near the sculpture garden, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit cut like intention. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't smiling. He was watching her, not with pity, but understanding. Like he already knew the story behind her steady breathing and trembling hands. The crowd between them blurred. Ava descended the staircase, every step deliberate, her pulse thundering but her face unreadable. She crossed the room until she stood before the stranger. No words, no plan, just the fire roaring through her veins. And then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't rehearsed. It was survival, a declaration that she would not be destroyed quietly. The music stopped mid-note. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. The cameras turned like predators scenting blood. But Ava didn't care. For those 3 seconds, the world belonged only to her. the woman who chose chaos over humiliation, truth over pretense. When she pulled away, the stranger didn't speak. He simply looked at her, eyes dark with something that felt dangerously close to respect. "Thank you," she whispered, breathless. "Anytime," he murmured. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place. "Though next time, you might tell me your name first." He smiled, slow, intrigued. "Ethan Hale." And somewhere in the flash of cameras, in the stunned silence of the city's elite, a scandal was born. Tomorrow, her name would be on every headline. Tonight, she had only one truth left. Sometimes the only way to survive a fire is to become it. The morning after the gala, Chicago was a city of whispers. Rain traced down glass towers like teardrops that refused to fall, and Ava Monroe stood at her apartment window, staring out at the skyline she had once thought was hers. Somewhere across the lake, headlines were blooming like bruises. The gala kiss that shook Chicago. She didn't open them. She didn't have to. She could already feel them under her skin, pulsing, spreading, defining her before she could speak. On the coffee table lay the shattered remains of her life in glossy print, art magazines, wedding invitations, and the mock-up of her next exhibition catalog. Everything perfectly aligned, perfectly lit, perfectly Ava. But perfection, she was learning, had a sound when it broke, quiet, sharp, and irreversible. Only 12 hours ago, she had been walking into the gala on Julian Cross's arm. The cameras had loved them, the golden couple of the art world. Julian, the heir to Cross Developments, a man whose smile opened museum doors and whose money kept them lit. Ava, the prodigy curator who had risen from a public university scholarship to become the youngest director of exhibitions at the Harrington Gallery. Together they were legacy and beauty and power, a portrait painted for applause. And yet, it began subtly. Julian's late meetings, the distance in his voice, the way his eyes drifted past her when she spoke about work. He'd begun calling her darling in the same tone he used with reporters. Warm, detached, rehearsed. Ava told herself it was stress, that love had seasons. But in the still moments, the quiet mornings before dawn, she'd felt it. The growing space between them, filled not with words but with indifference. Now that space had a name. Lena Torres, 24, ambitious, brilliant, with that particular kind of hunger the art world rewarded. Ava had hired her personally, had seen herself in the girl's drive, her wide eyes. She had mentored her, defended her, and last night she'd watched her betray her. It wasn't just the kiss that burned, it was the audacity of it. Julian had chosen her world to do it in, among her colleagues, her donors, her art. He had ruined her, not in private, but in the place where she was supposed to be untouchable. The humiliation was surgical, precise, and that made it worse. Ava's phone buzzed again. A message from Maya Brooks, her best friend since grad school. "Maya, I saw the footage. You want me to sue him or set his penthouse on fire? I'm flexible." Ava almost smiled. Almost. "AVA, don't. Just coffee later? I need to breathe." "Maya, already ordered. Strong and black, like your vengeance." Ava set the phone down and pressed her fingers to her temples. There was no space for tears, not yet. Her mind moved like a curator assembling an exhibit. What to save, what to discard, what to pretend never existed. She walked into her study, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of art books and sketches. In the center hung a massive photograph she'd taken years ago, a cracked mirror reflecting a woman's face. It had always been her favorite. Now, it felt prophetic. The doorbell rang. Her assistant, Evan, stood there with wide, nervous eyes and 2 cappuccinos in hand. "I thought you might need caffeine," he said carefully. "And, the board called. They want to discuss optics." "Optics," Ava repeated, the word sour in her mouth. "Of course they do." Evan hesitated. "For what it's worth, everyone at the gallery thinks you were kind of legendary last night." "Legendary?" "Yeah, the kiss, the walk away. It was cinematic. People are saying it wasn't a breakdown. It was a power move." Ava laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "A power move? I shattered a glass, kissed a stranger, and set the internet on fire." He shrugged. Sometimes chaos looks like courage from the outside. When he left, Ava turned to the window again. Chaos looked beautiful from a distance, she thought, like a painting, until you realized you were the one bleeding on the canvas. Her mind slipped backward to the months before the betrayal. She remembered the subtle changes in Julian's voice, how his affection had begun to sound like PR. The day she found a lipstick stain on his collar and told herself it was hers. The gallery meetings he'd accidentally missed. All the small lies she'd framed as misunderstandings until they built the picture she refused to see. Now the frame had shattered, and beneath it, the truth. Ava had spent years curating not just exhibitions, but her own life, selecting the right moments, the right tone, the right smile to survive in a world that judged her doubly harshly for being brilliant and black. She'd learned to be poised, articulate, untouchable, until Julian's betrayal ripped that armor open and forced her to feel something raw, something human. That evening, as the city turned gold with sunset, Ava sat at her dining table surrounded by chaos. Wine glass half empty, makeup smudged, hair undone. Her reflection in the window looked nothing like the poised woman on the magazine covers, and for the first time, she didn't hate what she saw. Beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something sharp, alive. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't sorrow. It was the quiet birth of rage. Rage, she realized, was not destruction. It was creation in disguise. It was the first crack in the perfect frame, the one that let the light in. Tomorrow, the city would talk. Tomorrow, Julian would try to control the story. Tomorrow, Ava Monroe, the woman who'd kissed a stranger and set the world ablaze, would begin again. And when she did, she would not rebuild the same frame. She would build fire. 3 days before the gala, the Harrington Gallery still smelled faintly of turpentine and ambition. Ava Monroe moved through the marble corridors like a conductor directing invisible music, her heels echoing against stone, her mind already arranging pieces for the upcoming exhibition. On the surface, she was calm. Inside, something fragile was beginning to tremble. The morning light filtered through the glass skylight, scattering across the canvases awaiting approval. Every detail had to be perfect. The lighting, the positioning, the tone. The gala wasn't just another event. It was her crown jewel, the culmination of 10 years of clawing her way into a world that wasn't built for her. Her assistant, Evan, trailed behind with a clipboard and the anxious energy of someone who understood how high the stakes were. "The donor list is finalized," he said quickly. "Press invitations are out, and Julian confirmed he'll be attending the pre-gala preview tomorrow night." Ava didn't look up. Of course he did. He never misses a photo opportunity. Evan hesitated. "You two okay?" It was a harmless question. Too harmless. Ava froze, her eyes fixed on a painting before her. A massive abstract piece, all fractured gold and deep crimson. The artist had titled it Disintegration. She stared at it longer than she meant to. "We're fine," she said finally. "He's just busy." Busy. The word tasted like rust. For weeks, Julian's busy had become a rhythm. Meetings, dinners, trips. Always legitimate, always plausible. Yet the silences between them had stretched longer, colder. He'd grown careful in his words, polished in his distance. She told herself she was imagining it, that relationships had seasons. But the instinct gnawed at her. When Evan left, the gallery fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Ava walked past the marble sculptures that lined the west corridor, her reflection flashing between them like a ghost. Her reflection looked tired, and she hated that. She stopped in front of the new intern's workspace, Lena Torres, 24, full of excitement, with a messy bun and a smile that reminded Ava of herself a decade ago. Lena was rearranging placards for the installation, humming softly under her breath. "Morning, Miss Monroe," she said brightly. "I finished cataloging the new acquisitions." Ava managed a small smile. "Thank you, Lena. You've been doing excellent work." Lena's cheeks flushed. "That means a lot coming from you." Ava lingered a moment, unsure why. The girl's energy was infectious, her confidence enviable. But lately there had been something else, an unease Ava couldn't name, a flicker of something she didn't want to see. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Julian. "Running late again tonight. Board dinner. Don't wait up. She typed back. Okay, be safe. The response came, 3 dots, then nothing. No heart emoji. No I love you. Not even a period. It was a small thing, so small it should have meant nothing. But Ava felt the chill of it sink deep, settling somewhere behind her ribs. Later that afternoon, while reviewing insurance paperwork in her office, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Evan stood in the doorway again, but this time his expression was strange, part hesitant, part alarmed. What is it? She asked. He stepped in and closed the door. I don't know if this matters, he began, but I was at the Langford Hotel last night. The rooftop bar. I saw Julian. Ava straightened, setting her pen down. And he wasn't alone, Evan said quietly. He was with Lena. For a moment, Ava thought she'd misheard him. Lena? She repeated. Evan nodded, regret flickering in his eyes. They were sitting close, too close. And when they saw me, they went quiet. Maybe it's nothing, maybe I misread it, but… Stop, Ava said, her voice soft but sharp. You don't have to protect me. Evan's throat worked. I'm sorry. I just thought you should know. When he left, the silence in the office was deafening. Ava sat there, staring at the skyline beyond her window, the city humming like a restless heart. She should have felt rage, betrayal, something cinematic. Instead, she felt numb, like her body had gone cold from the inside out. The memory of Lena's blush, Julian's absences, the subtle shifts in tone, all of it began assembling itself into an ugly, undeniable picture. She'd always believed truth revealed itself in fragments, like an unfinished painting. Now, she was staring at the final brushstroke. That evening, she walked the gallery alone, the marble corridors glowing under low light. Her heels echoed with the precision of a metronome. The sculptures watched her pass. Venus, Apollo, forms carved in eternal poise. They were beautiful, perfect, and lifeless. At the end of the hall, she stopped before a modern installation she'd approved weeks ago. A cracked mirror suspended between 2 marble pillars. The artist had called it the split. Standing before it, Ava saw 2 reflections, one composed, the other fractured by the fault line down the center. It was the most honest portrait of her she'd ever seen. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window with a glass of wine, the city lights blinking below. Each building shimmered like possibility and deceit. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would go to the gala, perfectly composed. She would wear the gown Julian had chosen for her, smile for the cameras, and let the world see what a woman looked like when her heart broke quietly. Because sometimes, silence was strategy. Sometimes restraint was the sharpest blade. And if the rumors were true, if Julian really had crossed that invisible line, then the Harrington Gala would not just be his stage, it would be hers. Ava took another sip of wine and whispered into the pale morning light, almost to herself. Let him play his game. I'll end it in mine. Outside, the sun rose over Chicago, painting the marble towers gold. Inside the gallery, the whispers had already begun. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in winter air and expectation. From the outside, the Harrington Gallery gleamed like a glass cathedral, every window alive with light, every marble column a pillar of power. Inside, it was a kingdom of sequins and champagne, of cameras that flashed like lightning and laughter that sounded rehearsed. Ava Monroe stood at the top of the grand staircase, a living masterpiece draped in scarlet silk. The gown was sculpted fire, fitted to her curves, catching every glint of chandelier light, bold enough to silence a room without saying a word. She had chosen it deliberately. If she was going to burn, she would burn beautifully. Julian was beside her, impeccable in a black tuxedo, smiling for the photographers as if the world belonged to him. He looked exactly like the man the city loved. Charming, generous, perfectly composed. No one could have guessed the empire of lies standing between them. Smile, he murmured between his teeth as the cameras flared. Her lips curved. But it wasn't a smile. It was a blade. The ballroom below was already overflowing. Every collector, critic, and board member who mattered was there. Waiters glided past with trays of champagne, the air heavy with perfume and politics. Ava could feel the weight of every gaze, the invisible currency of reputation passing between them. Julian's hand rested lightly on her back. The touch felt foreign, like a performance they had both grown tired of acting. They moved through the crowd together, the perfect couple, all charm and chemistry. People greeted her with the same mixture of admiration and envy they always had. But tonight, she could see behind the eyes of everyone she spoke to. The smiles were practiced, the compliments hollow. It was all theater. And she, for the first time, was aware of her role as both actor and audience. Halfway through the evening, Julian's phone buzzed. He leaned close. "Business," he whispered. "2 minutes." She nodded, her expression flawless, and watched him disappear through the corridor leading to the West Wing. 2 minutes. She made small talk with a donor, accepted another glass of champagne, and laughed at a joke she didn't hear. But the seconds stretched, heavy and metallic. Her laughter faded. Julian didn't come back. Ava's gaze drifted toward the far hallway, the one that led to the private collection galleries. The same marble corridor where the most valuable pieces were kept. The same place Evan had mentioned 3 days ago when he said, "I saw Julian with Lena." Her pulse thudded like a metronome in her ears. She didn't plan to move, but her feet did anyway, carrying her through the crowd with calm precision. Each step felt like walking into a storm she had already seen coming. The corridor was dim, lined with marble and framed paintings. The faint echo of laughter reached her before she saw them. She followed the sound around the corner, and the world fractured. Julian was there. Lena was there, pressed against the wall, hidden beneath the soft glow of a wall sconce. Their bodies curved into each other like a secret. His hand was in her hair, his mouth on hers. For a moment, time stopped. The air thinned. The paintings blurred into colorless shapes. All she could hear was the blood in her ears and the sharp, deliberate sound of her breath. The champagne flute slipped from her hand. It shattered against the marble floor, crystals scattering like truth finally breaking through illusion. Julian's head jerked up. His expression wasn't guilt. It was fear, no, irritation, as if she were the one intruding. "Ava," he started, but the sound of her name from his lips was unbearable. She turned. She didn't run, didn't speak, didn't cry. Her heels clicked steadily on marble, the rhythm a metronome for composure. Each step away from him was a step out of a life she no longer recognized. When she reached the end of the corridor, she paused. Her reflection flashed in a gilded mirror beside the entrance, her eyes bright, her lips trembling, the scarlet silk clinging to her like armor. She looked like a woman moments from breaking, or from becoming something unrecognizable. She walked back into the ballroom. The noise hit her like a wave. Music, laughter, chatter. No one noticed the storm in her chest. Not yet. Then she saw him. Across the room, standing near the sculpture installation, was a man she didn't know. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tuxedo impeccable but understated. His presence didn't clamor, it commanded. And his eyes, when they met hers, were calm. Observing, understanding. It was as if he saw everything, the heartbreak, the fury, the pride, and recognized it all. In that suspended second, something inside Ava snapped into clarity. If Julian had stolen her dignity in the shadows, she would reclaim it in the light. She crossed the ballroom. People turned as she moved through them, slowly, deliberately, the crimson of her dress cutting through a sea of black and gold. The music faded beneath the thrum of her pulse. When she reached him, she didn't ask his name, didn't hesitate. She reached up, took his face in her hands and kissed him. Gasps rippled through the room. Glasses paused mid-air. The string quartet fell silent. It wasn't romance, it was reclamation. It wasn't desire, it was defiance. The kiss was steady, sure, unapologetic. 3 seconds of chaos that rewrote everything she had been taught about control. When she pulled away, her breath trembled against his skin. His eyes met hers, dark and steady. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Behind her, the whispers had already begun. Shocked, hungry, electric. Julian was somewhere in that crowd, watching, burning. Ava smoothed her gown, lifted her chin, and walked away. Every camera turned, every voice rose, every secret she'd been forced to swallow bloomed into wildfire. She didn't look back, because sometimes survival isn't quiet. Sometimes survival wears silk and walks straight through fire. The night air hit Ava like cold mercy. Outside the Harrington Gallery, snow had begun to fall. Soft, weightless, almost kind. The city lights fractured through it, turning each flake into a glittering lie. Behind her, the ballroom still pulsed with music, with whispers, with the aftermath of her rebellion. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed distance, from the cameras, from Julian, from the memory of her own shaking hands. Her heels clicked against the marble steps, sharp against the silence. The scarlet silk of her gown trailed behind her like a dying flame. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, over and over. Julian. She turned it off. Then, through the swirl of snow and the noise of her heartbeat, she heard a voice. You shouldn't be walking alone in that dress. People might mistake you for a spark about to set the city on fire. Ava turned. The man from the ballroom, the stranger she had kissed, stood beneath the halo of a street lamp. Snow dusted his dark hair and shoulders. The light caught the edge of his jaw, the hint of a smile that wasn't arrogance but something gentler, something that asked for nothing. She should have been mortified, but exhaustion had stripped her of everything except truth. I might, she said softly, if I had anything left to burn. He studied her for a beat. I doubt that. They stood there, two strangers in the snow, their breath fogging the air between them. The city moved around them, cabs hissing by, sirens wailing somewhere distant. Yet the moment felt still, like the world had folded in half to make space for them. Ava finally spoke. You didn't ask why. Why what? Why I did it. He tilted his head. I didn't need to. You didn't kiss like a woman trying to be seen. You kissed like someone trying not to disappear. Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something that nakedly true to her before. Do you usually psychoanalyze women who ambush you at charity galas? She asked, a faint smile ghosting her lips. Only the unforgettable ones. Something between them shifted. Not flirtation, not pity, but recognition. Two souls that had lived through the same kind of ache, one that didn't always need words. A gust of wind caught her hair. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. He noticed. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the street. There's a place around the corner. Best jazz in the city and no photographers. You could use something stronger than champagne. She hesitated. Logic said to walk away, but her heart, raw and trembling, wanted silence that wasn't lonely. Lead the way, she murmured. They walked in silence, the snow softening the city's harshness. Ava's heels left perfect red prints along the white pavement. The stranger's stride matched hers, unhurried, steady, respectful. He held the door open as they entered a small jazz bar tucked beneath an old theater marquee. The warmth hit her immediately. Dim lights, slow saxophone, the air rich with bourbon and old secrets. They slid into a booth near the back. For a moment, neither spoke. The music filled the spaces their words couldn't yet touch. Finally, he extended his hand across the table. I realize I should introduce myself before this becomes the most mysterious night of my life. Ethan Hale. Ava stared at his hand, then took it. His grip was firm, his palm warm. Ava Monroe. He smiled. I know. Of course you do, she said with a soft laugh. Everyone does now. Ethan's gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. Let them talk. Tonight, it's just us. Something inside her loosened. For the first time since the betrayal, the air around her didn't feel heavy with judgment. She looked at him closely now. The faint scar near his temple, the crease at the corner of his mouth when he half smiled. The eyes that seemed to hold both calm and wreckage. So, Ethan Hale, she said, swirling her drink. What's your story? Mysterious art thief? Billionaire recluse? Secret therapist for broken women? He chuckled. None of the above. I'm an art historian. I work independently, consulting for museums, tracking stolen works, verifying authenticity. I was in town to review a private collection. Convenient, Ava said, arching an eyebrow. Happening to be at the very gala where a woman's life imploded. Maybe, he replied, or maybe some people are meant to cross paths when everything falls apart. The words hung there between them, fragile, luminous, dangerous. Ava looked away, her voice barely a whisper. I thought I had everything figured out. My career, my marriage, my future. But turns out all it takes is one moment, one betrayal, to make you question who you really are. Ethan leaned forward, or to finally find out. Her breath caught. For a long time they said nothing. The saxophone played low and mournful, the kind of melody that could only exist at the edge of heartbreak. "I'm not used to feeling small," she said finally. "But tonight I did." He shook his head. "You didn't look small. You looked unstoppable." Ava's laugh was quiet, disbelieving. "You think kissing a stranger made me unstoppable?" "No," he said softly. "I think choosing to live when someone tried to erase you did." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intimate, almost sacred. Outside, the snow fell harder, blurring the windows, turning the world beyond into a painting of light and motion. Inside, Ava felt something she hadn't in weeks: stillness. When the night ended, Ethan paid the bill despite her protest. They stepped back into the snow, the cold air sobering, grounding. "Thank you," she said, her breath visible between them, "for not asking for anything." He smiled faintly. "You've given me more than you think." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" "A reminder," he said, "that even art has to break before it becomes timeless." Ava looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the waiting car that would take her home. As the door closed behind her, she caught one last glimpse of him through the glass, standing under the streetlight, a figure of calm in the storm. For the first time since the night began, she didn't feel lost, just unfinished. And somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the hurt and the noise, something began to stir. Quiet, dangerous, alive. The morning after the gala, Chicago woke up to chaos. Sunlight spilled across 1,000 screens, phones, tablets, televisions, all replaying the same 3 seconds on loop. The kiss. Ava Monroe, the city's darling of the art world, the face of elegance and restraint, locking lips with a stranger in a gown of living fire. The cameras had caught everything. The slow, deliberate turn of her head, the parting of her lips, the stunned silence that followed. It was scandal, art, rebellion, all captured in perfect cinematic symmetry. And the internet was ravenous. By sunrise, hashtags were everywhere. Hashtag the gala kiss. Hashtag Ava and the stranger. Hashtag fire in silk. Millions of views, thousands of edits. Someone had even slowed down the footage and added orchestral music, turning her act of heartbreak into a viral opera. But not all the noise was applause. Half the comments called her powerful. The other half called her unhinged. The world, as always, divided itself between those who wanted to see her rise and those who wanted to watch her burn. Inside her apartment, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, her phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from sleeplessness. The city outside looked washed clean, but she was still drowning in the aftermath. Her inbox was a battlefield. Journalists, sponsors, friends turned opportunists, all wanting a statement. Her PR consultant had called twice, left voicemails that sounded like prayers and warnings. She hadn't listened to any of them. The television was on mute, yet she could read the headlines scrolling beneath the anchor's polished smile. Ava Monroe, meltdown or masterpiece? The kiss that shattered the art world. Where is Julian Cross? Julian. She hadn't heard from him since the night imploded. Not a call, not a message, but his family's PR machine was already in motion. They were rewriting the narrative, painting her as emotional, volatile, under strain. The oldest story in the world. When a woman burns, call it hysteria. When a man betrays her, call it human error. The door buzzer broke her thoughts. Ava dragged herself to answer it, still barefoot. Silk robe knotted loosely at her waist. Maya Brooks burst in without waiting for permission, dropping her tote bag onto the couch. Her eyes were blazing, equal parts fury and sisterhood. "Tell me you've seen this madness," she demanded. "I've seen it," Ava murmured. "Everyone has." Maya turned the TV volume up. The screen cut to footage of Julian stepping out of his penthouse, sunglasses on, jaw tight, reporters swarming. "Mr. Cross, any comment on your fiancé's behavior last night? Do you plan to proceed with the wedding? Was the kiss staged for publicity?" Julian said nothing, just pushed past them with the practiced indifference of a man who'd built his empire on silence. Maya's jaw clenched. "He's letting you hang alone." Classic. Ava didn't respond. She walked to the window, pulling the curtains aside. Outside, the city pulsed, indifferent, electric, alive. The world didn't pause for broken hearts. It never had. "Do you want me to handle this?" Maya asked softly. "A public statement? A defamation counter? We can spin this. Make it empowerment instead of scandal." Ava turned. "If I fight, I look guilty. If I stay silent, I look weak. Either way, they'll decide who I am before I do." Maya crossed her arms. "Then give them something they can't control. Give them truth." Truth. The word lodged in Ava's chest like a stone. She walked to the table where her laptop lay open, still on a news page dissecting her every expression. The captions read, "Ava Monroe's composure cracks at last." She stared at the cursor, blinking in an empty document for a long time before typing. "I didn't kiss for revenge. I kissed to remember I existed." She paused. The simplicity of it startled her. It wasn't strategy. It was confession. Maya read over her shoulder and nodded slowly. "That's your headline. Post it exactly as it is." Ava hesitated. "They'll twist it. They'll twist anything," Maya said. "But this they'll feel." Minutes later, Ava hit post. The internet inhaled. Within an hour, the quote was everywhere. Screenshots, stories, reaction videos. People began to argue, to analyze, to project. Some called it poetry. Others called it manipulation. But beneath the noise, something shifted. For the first time, the narrative wasn't being written by Julian's PR firm, or the tabloids, or the public's thirst for chaos. It was hers. As the day stretched on, Ava watched herself go viral again, but differently this time. The image of the kiss had been replaced by her words, printed in bold white letters over her photograph. "I kissed to remember I existed." They called it the line that broke the internet. By evening, her inbox flooded again. Brands wanting partnerships, artists thanking her for humanizing success, young women calling her brave. But not everyone was cheering. Her gallery board issued a formal statement calling her behavior unbecoming of her professional stature. An emergency meeting was scheduled. Funding for her next exhibition was under review. Ava read the email twice, then closed her laptop. The anger that rose in her wasn't new. It was ancestral. She thought of all the times she'd been told to smile softer, speak slower, be less passionate so she wouldn't scare the donors. She thought of the women before her who'd been destroyed for feeling too much in public. That night, she sat alone on her balcony, overlooking the frozen river. The city lights flickered like distant stars. She could still taste the remnants of champagne and defiance on her lips. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Miss Monroe?" The voice was warm, familiar. "It's Ethan Hale." She exhaled slowly. "Of course it is. I saw the statement," he said. "You were brilliant." "I wasn't trying to be," she replied. "I just couldn't breathe under their version of me anymore." "Good," Ethan said softly. "Keep breathing. The world can wait." When the call ended, Ava leaned back in her chair, the wind tugging at her hair. The chaos wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time, she felt the faintest flicker of control. Her name was everywhere. Her life was dissected, debated, adored, condemned. But in the noise, something unexpected was born. Not ruin, reinvention. Because sometimes the only way to rewrite your story is to let the world misread the first draft and then set it on fire. The city hadn't stopped talking for 3 days. Every screen, every news feed, every whispered conversation in a coffee shop still circled around one name, Ava Monroe. Some called her fearless, others reckless. Some said she had weaponized vulnerability. Others said she had lost control. But what none of them realized was that while they argued over her story, Ava was quietly planning her countermove. The morning light poured into her apartment, pale and merciless. Her phone lay on the table beside an untouched cup of coffee, still buzzing with messages. Publicists, journalists, former friends suddenly rediscovering loyalty. She ignored them all. Across from her, Maya Brooks sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop open, hair pulled into the messy bun she always wore when plotting war. "Your post has 4.7 million shares," Maya said. "You're trending in 22 countries. Everyone wants an interview. Ava didn't look up. And the board? They're meeting tomorrow. Half of them think you're an embarrassment. The other half think you're free publicity. Ava let out a quiet laugh, sharp as glass. So the usual. Maya closed the laptop and studied her friend. You know what I think? You're playing defense when you should be dictating the narrative. Let Julian and his PR machine drown in spin. You set the truth. The truth? Ava repeated, her tone bitter. The truth is messy. People don't want it. They want a story they can consume. Maya leaned forward. Then give them one worth choking on. Silence settled. The only sound was the hum of the city outside, rising like a distant storm. That was when Ava knew. She couldn't hide anymore. She wouldn't. She straightened, eyes sharpening with purpose. Schedule a press statement. 1 hour. No scripts. No PR team. Maya blinked. You're serious? I've spent a decade perfecting silence. It's time to use my voice. Dash, dash. An hour later, Ava sat before the camera in her living room, framed by the city skyline. She wore no makeup, no designer armor, just a black turtleneck and a steady gaze. The live stream began. Tens of thousands tuned in instantly. Comments poured like rain down the screen, hearts and fire emojis flickering in real time. Ava took a slow breath. I've been called many things this week, she began, her voice calm, deliberate. Unstable, emotional, impulsive. The list grows longer every hour. But let's be honest, those words aren't about me. They're about control. She paused, the quiet in her apartment pulsing with tension. When a man loses his temper, he's passionate. When a woman reacts to betrayal, she's a spectacle. When a man reclaims his dignity, he's bold. When a woman does, she's dangerous. The chat exploded. Lines of text raced upward too fast to read. Ava continued, her tone steady but edged with fire. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for accuracy. My life didn't implode because of one kiss. It imploded because I spent years being perfect for people who were never honest with me. I built a career on grace while the men around me built theirs on entitlement. The moment I stopped playing by their rules, they called it chaos. She leaned forward slightly. Maybe it was chaos, but it was mine. The words landed like thunder. She could feel it even before the stream ended. The collective inhale of millions of strangers who had spent their lives being told to shrink. Dash, dash. By evening, clips from her speech had flooded the internet. The line, maybe it was chaos, but it was mine, became the rallying cry of 1,000 reposts, 1,000 think pieces. News anchors dissected her tone. Influencers quoted her between product ads. Even the gallery's social media team quietly changed their banner to feature her quote over a blurred photo of the Harrington marble staircase. Julian, of course, was not silent for long. By nightfall, his family's PR firm released an official statement. Mr. Cross wishes Ms. Monroe healing and privacy during this difficult time. Their engagement was mutually dissolved, and he remains focused on his philanthropic commitments. It was calculated, polished, cowardly. Ava read it once, then laughed. A clean laugh, hollow and sharp. Healing and privacy, she murmured to Maya, who was now pacing behind her. Translation, she lost her mind, and he's the hero. Maya stopped. Then don't let him be. Ava's eyes narrowed. You have an idea. Oh, I have several, Maya grinned. But one in particular will make him choke on his own civility. She handed Ava her phone. On the screen was a photo of the two of them years ago, at the opening of Ava's first exhibition. Behind them was one of her early curations, a piece titled The Anatomy of Control. It depicted a marble statue half-shattered, the cracks filled with gold resin. Ava had chosen it to symbolize how beauty could coexist with damage. What if, Maya said, you relaunch the piece? A new exhibition, different name, new message. Let that be your response. Ava stared at the image for a long moment. The cracks gleamed, gold against white stone. Yes, she said quietly. Let's build something from the ashes. Dash, dash. 2 weeks later, the invitations went out. A single image, the cracked marble statue. A single title, Resurgence. And beneath it, 5 words in bold white letters, curated by Ava Monroe. The art world erupted again. Some called it arrogance. Others called it genius. The gossip pages predicted disaster. The critics whispered rebirth, but Ava didn't care. She was done asking permission to exist. Dash dash. The night before the exhibition, she stood alone in the gallery, the same halls where she had watched her old life collapse. Now, the marble floors glowed under the soft wash of spotlights. The air hummed with something different this time. Not fear, not humiliation. Power. She looked up at the central piece, a massive fractured mirror installation. Across the top, etched in silver, were the words, "Maybe it was chaos, but it was mine." Her own reflection stared back, multiplied and broken and whole all at once. Ava smiled faintly. The perfect frame had cracked, and through its fractures, the light finally came in. Tomorrow, the world would see it, and for the first time, it would be on her terms. The Harrington Gallery smelled different now, not of fresh paint and champagne, as it once had, but of memory, of dust, old varnish, and the faint trace of something once sacred that had since gone cold. Ava Monroe stood in the center of the main hall, surrounded by her own curation, yet it felt like she was walking through a mausoleum. Each piece, each sculpture, each echo of applause she had once earned now seemed to belong to someone else, some past version of herself who still believed in permanence. "Back so soon," said a voice from behind her. Evan, her assistant, loyal, nervous, always watching, stood in the doorway holding a stack of folders. His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed the tension they both felt. The board had reinstated her on a provisional basis, which was their polished way of saying, "We need your talent, but not your scandal." "I needed to see it before the press arrives," Ava said. "The exhibition feels different at night." "It feels haunted," Evan murmured, glancing around. Ava smiled faintly. "All museums are haunted, Evan, by everything we try to preserve." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew that the ghosts here weren't just trapped in the art. They were hers. Julian's laughter, Lena's eager voice, the sound of her own heels clicking down this same corridor the night her world had fractured. Now, her new exhibition, Resurgence, had transformed the gallery into something else entirely, a cathedral of brokenness reborn. The cracked mirror installation dominated the entrance, its golden seams gleaming beneath the soft white light. People called it a masterpiece, though Ava knew it wasn't art born from genius. It was born from survival. As she walked between the exhibits, her reflections shifted and fractured across each piece of glass. Dozens of versions of Ava moved with her, poised, uncertain, furious, reborn. Evan broke the silence. "You know Julian's coming tomorrow night." She didn't stop walking. "Of course he is. He RSVP'd this morning. And Lena," Evan hesitated, "she won't be here. The board let her go quietly last week." Ava turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Good. Ghosts don't belong among the living." Dash dash. Later, after Evan left, Ava wandered deeper into the darkened corridors of the gallery. She turned off the main lights, leaving only the emergency strips along the walls, letting the art bathe in shadows. The soft hum of electricity was the only sound. She paused before a new piece, an oil painting by an anonymous artist. A woman's silhouette stood before a burning house, her back to the flames, her face turned toward an endless sky. The plaque beneath it read only, "She chose the fire." Ava stood there a long time. The image felt too close, too honest. She remembered that night vividly, the shattering glass, the kiss, the silence after the applause, the way she had walked out of the ballroom feeling both ruined and remade. Every headline had called it her downfall. They hadn't realized it was her resurrection. She moved to the next room. The Museum of Ghosts, as she had nicknamed it privately, was an installation of mirrors, suspended photographs, and broken frames. Each photo showed fragments of her previous exhibitions, success frozen in time. But the mirrors distorted them, bending reflections until recognition was lost. It was beautiful and cruel, exactly as she intended. And that was when she heard the footsteps. Soft, measured, deliberate. She turned, expecting Evan again, but instead, there he was, Ethan Hale. He stood at the edge of the hall, hands in his pockets, eyes traveling across the room like he was studying a relic from another century. His presence filled the space quietly, naturally, the way music fills a church. "You shouldn't be here," Ava said softly. He smiled. "Neither should ghosts, but here we are." Something in her chest loosened at the sound of his voice. "How did you even get in?" He held up a gallery pass. "Press clearance. Perks of pretending to be a journalist." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not?" He shook his head, still smiling. "I came to see the art. Yours." The way he said it, yours, carried no irony, no pity, just quiet reverence. They walked side by side through the hall, the silence between them thicker than conversation. "This place feels alive," Ethan said at last. "Like every piece is breathing with you." Ava laughed under her breath. "It's breathing because of me. Everything here was made out of what broke me. I wanted people to feel it, the cost of beauty." He studied her profile in the dim light. "You turned pain into architecture. That's not cost. That's creation." His words hit her deeper than she wanted to admit. They reached the cracked mirror installation at the center of the gallery. Under the reflection, their faces fragmented into dozens of halves, hers on one side, his on the other, merging only in the shimmer of gold between the fractures. Ava looked at him through the broken glass. "I don't know why you keep showing up. Maybe because you keep pretending you don't need anyone," Ethan said quietly. The truth in his tone unsettled her. "And you think you're the one I need?" He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the quiet gravity of him. "No, I think you already have everything you need. You just don't trust it yet." Ava met his gaze in the mirror, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford anymore." Ethan's reflection tilted his head. "Then maybe start smaller. Believe in what you've already built." She exhaled, her shoulders softening. "You sound like a curator." "I'm just a man who knows art when he sees it," he said, "even when it's trying not to be seen." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the woman who'd set her world ablaze, and the man who had seen her through the smoke. Then Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope. "I found something," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a photograph, an old exhibition catalog from a forgotten 1970s artist. The title read, "The Anatomy of Return." The artist's note beneath it, "We are not who we were. We are who survived." Ava traced the words with her fingertip. "Where did you find this?" "Paris," he said simply. "Thought it belonged to you." Something inside her ached, a quiet, sacred ache. When she looked up again, Ethan was watching her with that same steady gaze. "You don't have to forgive him," he said. "You just have to stop letting him live here." Ava glanced around at the marble walls, the mirrored reflections, the faint echo of her own pain immortalized as art. Maybe that was what this gallery truly was, a museum of ghosts she hadn't buried yet. But now she finally saw the door, and for the first time, she was ready to walk through it. That night, as the city slept, Ava remained in the dim gallery, standing beneath her own reflection. The golden fractures shimmered under the last flicker of the lights, whispering their quiet truth. She had been shattered, but she was not broken. And tomorrow, when the world returned to witness her rebirth, the ghosts would finally be gone. The night before the exhibition's public opening, Chicago trembled with stormlight. Rain streaked across the glass skyline like the city was crying in secret, its thunder a slow, simmering pulse that matched Ava's heartbeat. She stood before the penthouse doors she once called home. The security lights blinked red, indifferent, unknowing. The keys in her hand felt heavier than they used to, no longer a symbol of belonging, but of ghosts that refused to stay dead. Julian Cross still lived here. And tonight, Ava was done letting him live rent-free inside her mind. She didn't knock. She entered. The elevator opened directly into the living room, a cathedral of marble and glass overlooking the city. Everything was exactly as she remembered it. The scent of bergamot, the low hum of the sound system, the sterile perfection of wealth. The art she had chosen still hung on the walls. Her touch lingered everywhere, preserved like an artifact he couldn't erase. Julian appeared from the hallway, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, drink in hand. He looked startled, but not guilty. No, Julian had never wasted emotion on guilt. "Ava," he said, calm, composed, as if her arrival were some predictable twist in his script. "I was wondering when you'd show up." She looked at him, taking in the man who had once convinced her that control was love. "You always were good at waiting for disasters," she replied. He smiled faintly, swirling his whiskey. "You've made quite the spectacle. The kiss, the statement, the exhibition. I almost admire it." "You don't admire anything you can't control," she said, stepping closer. "That's always been your problem." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "My problem, Ava, was trusting that you'd handle yourself with discretion. I was wrong. You've turned your breakdown into a brand." Her laughter was soft and sharp, cutting through the room. "You mistake survival for performance. You always did." Julian set down his glass, his tone cooling. "You've embarrassed the board, the donors, the Cross Foundation, everything we built together. And for what? A moment of rebellion? A stranger's lips? Everything we built?" Ava's voice rose, not in volume but in power. "You built an image. I built the art, the vision, the soul of it. You just bought the walls to hang it on." He stared at her, unblinking. "You always were dramatic. And you," she said, "always mistook apathy for strength." The silence that followed was heavy, brittle. Outside, lightning flared, white fire across the skyline. Julian finally exhaled, a mockery of patience. "Ava, I'm not your villain. We both made choices. You knew the kind of man I was when you met me." "Yes," she said, "but I didn't realize I'd have to bury the woman I was to keep you comfortable." He looked away, perhaps for the first time realizing that her calm was more dangerous than her anger. "You think you've won," he said low, "but this industry forgets quickly. Today you're a symbol. Tomorrow you're a scandal again." She stepped closer until only inches separated them. "I don't need their memory. I just need my name back." "And what about Lena?" he asked suddenly, his tone slicing through the air. Ava froze. "What about her?" "She thought you'd destroy her," he said, "that you'd make her the villain." Ava's voice steadied. "She doesn't need me to make her anything. She already chose her role." Julian's smile twisted. "She loved me, you know." Ava's eyes didn't waver. "So did I. And you destroyed that too. You don't love people, Julian. You consume them." He flinched. Not visibly, but enough for her to notice. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the glass like applause from an unseen audience. Ava looked around the room one last time. The furniture they'd chosen together, the books she'd arranged, the paintings she'd framed. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of what control looked like when dressed in designer linen. She set her keycard down on the counter. The sound was final. "You can keep your empire," she said quietly, "but it's already collapsing. You just haven't noticed yet." Julian's expression hardened. "You think walking away makes you powerful?" "No," she said, turning toward the door. "Walking away makes me free." He took a step forward. "Ava, don't pretend this doesn't hurt you." She stopped at the threshold, not looking back. "Of course it hurts, but pain isn't weakness, Julian. It's proof I survived you." Dash, dash. The elevator descended in silence, the city lights flickering through the glass shaft as if bowing her out of the past. When she stepped into the lobby, the night air hit her like absolution. Ethan was waiting outside. He stood under the canopy, rain beating on his coat, eyes steady as she approached. "You did it," he said softly. Ava nodded. "I thought it would feel like revenge. It doesn't." "What does it feel like?" "Like oxygen," she said. He smiled faintly. "You look lighter." "I left my ghosts upstairs." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single gold key. "What's this?" she asked. "It's not a key," Ethan said. "It's a reminder. I found it in a museum archive in Florence. Symbolic keys used by women in the Renaissance when they opened their first ateliers. It meant ownership, freedom." Ava stared at it, her eyes softening. "And you think I deserve that?" "I think you already earned it." For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them. The rain, the neon shimmer of the street, the quiet pulse of something unspoken. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Tomorrow, Paris. There's a private collection opening. They want you there." She blinked. "You already planned this?" "I hoped," he said. "Not planned." She hesitated, then looked back at the penthouse one last time. The cold windows, the dim outline of the life she'd escaped.
"I'll go,"
She said finally, but not to run away.
Ethan smiled.
No, to begin. Later that night, Ava stood by her window, the gold key turning slowly in her fingers. Outside, lightning fractured the sky again. Just once, bright and final. In the glass reflection, she saw not the woman who had been humiliated, not the scandal everyone debated, but the architect of her own rebirth. Empires collapse, but some ruins are more honest than kingdoms. And from those ruins, something greater can rise. Something made not of marble or illusion, but of truth, blood, and the fire of a woman who finally refused to stay silent. Paris smelled like rain and rebirth. When the plane descended over the city, Ava pressed her forehead against the window and watched the clouds scatter like torn silk. Below her, the Seine cut through the city like a silver scar, beautiful because it had endured everything that tried to contain it. She had left Chicago behind, its noise, its rumors, its ghosts. But she hadn't escaped. You never really escape the versions of yourself that break. You just learn to carry them differently. Ethan met her at the airport, his coat collar turned up against the wind, eyes warm but cautious, as if he knew she was still learning how to exist in quiet places. Bienvenue, he said softly, offering her a smile that didn't ask for anything. Ava smiled faintly. I'm not sure I belong here yet. He studied her for a moment. Maybe belonging isn't the point anymore. The next few weeks passed in muted rhythm. Days filled with gallery visits, quiet cafes, and long walks along the Seine, where the air itself felt like memory. Ava rented a small apartment above a bookshop in Le Marais. Walls lined with peeling wallpaper, windows that opened to a courtyard full of ivy. It was imperfect, but it was hers. Each morning, she sat at the small wooden table by the window with her sketchbook, filling it with shapes and colors that didn't need to please anyone. No critics, no boards, no Julian. Just the act of creation for its own sake, a kind of healing no one could photograph. For the first time in years, Ava allowed herself to slow down. She cooked. She read poetry again. She laughed, sometimes unexpectedly, like sound had finally remembered how to find her. But healing, she learned, isn't graceful. It's not a soft sunrise. It's a battlefield between the person you were and the one you're becoming. One night, Ethan invited her to a small private exhibition at a converted warehouse on Rue Oberkampf. The theme was Renaissance reimagined, art born from ruin. The room buzzed with quiet reverence, filled with canvases that looked like they had been painted from within dreams. Ava wandered from piece to piece, her heart catching on one particular sculpture, a bronze figure of a woman kneeling, hands pressed to the ground as if searching for the strength to rise. She's not broken, said Ethan, coming to stand beside her. She's just pausing mid-transformation. Ava glanced at him. You always talk like an artist. He shrugged. I study what survives time. That includes people. There was something in the way he said it that made her chest ache, a tenderness she didn't know how to hold. They ended the night walking along the river. The city glowed gold around them, reflections rippling across the water. Ava spoke quietly, almost afraid to break the spell. I used to think becoming meant rebuilding, fixing what was lost. But maybe it's about letting the ruins speak too. Ethan smiled. That's the most honest kind of art there is. Weeks passed. Paris unfolded like a long exhale. Ava began writing again. Essays, reflections, fragments of thought that she never intended to publish. Yet when she sent one piece to a friend at the Atlantic, it was accepted instantly. The essay was titled, The Art of Becoming. In it, she wrote, we talk about strength as if it's loud, as if surviving means standing tall. But sometimes strength is the quiet decision to stay soft, even after the world hardens you. I used to think I was rebuilding myself. Now I understand I was sculpting from what remained. The piece went viral overnight, not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. People didn't see the kiss anymore. They saw the woman behind it, the artist, the thinker, the survivor who had turned her pain into language that felt like truth. Offers flooded in, lecture invitations, magazine features, collaborations from art institutions that had once turned their backs on her. But Ava wasn't interested in redemption through validation. She had already found it through creation. One rainy afternoon, she visited the Musée d'Orsay alone. The halls were nearly empty, the air perfumed with old wood and history. She stopped before a Monet, one she'd seen 100 times before. But this time, she noticed something new. It wasn't the colors. It was the brushwork, the way the chaos of each stroke became harmony only from a distance. That's what becoming was, she realized. Standing close to your chaos until one day, you step back and see it was art all along. Ava felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. That night, she called Maya in Chicago. The line crackled with distance and nostalgia. "You sound different," Maya said after a pause. "Calm. Dangerous calm." Ava laughed softly. "Maybe that's just peace." Maya smiled through the line. "So what's next for the infamous Ava Monroe?" "I don't know," Ava admitted. "Maybe a new exhibition. Something smaller, intimate. Something about rebirth." "Name it. The Art of Becoming," Maya said. "The world already knows the title." Ava looked out the window, the city lights flickering against the rain. "Maybe I will." The next morning, she received a call from the director of the Louvre's Modern Art Division. They wanted her to curate a limited exhibition, her first major invitation since the scandal. The theme, they said, was transformation. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. As she hung up, Ava stood by the window, Paris glowing beneath her like a living canvas. She thought of the woman she'd been, the one who had shattered under the weight of perfection, and the woman she was now, piecing herself together not to look whole, but to feel real. It wasn't healing. It wasn't revenge. It was becoming. That night, she wrote a line in her journal. "When I stopped trying to be art, I became the artist." The ink bled slightly on the page, the way truth always does when it's finally free. She closed the journal, poured herself a glass of wine, and let the sound of the Paris rain write the rest of the story on her behalf. Outside, the world moved as it always had, beautiful, flawed, indifferent. But inside her chest, something had changed forever. Ava Monroe had learned that the truest masterpiece wasn't the one hanging in a gallery. It was the one that learned how to live again. The morning Ava Monroe walked into the Louvre, the city seemed to hold its breath. Parisian sunlight filtered through the museum's glass pyramid, casting fractured diamonds of light across the marble floor. The air hummed faintly with footsteps and whispers, the heartbeat of history. And at the center of it all, Ava stood still, clutching the folder that contained her curatorial proposal. Resurgence, the art of becoming. It was more than an exhibition. It was her redemption, disguised as revolution. As she moved through the corridors lined with centuries of genius, she felt the weight of every woman who had ever been reduced, rewritten, or erased. The irony wasn't lost on her. After all, she'd once curated art for men who wanted her polished and quiet, not powerful. Now she was rewriting that silence. The director of modern exhibitions, Madame Lefebvre, greeted her with the kind of composure that only comes from decades of ruling rooms full of art and ego. "Mademoiselle Monroe," she said with a crisp French accent, "we have followed your story." Ava smiled politely. "I suspected you had." Lefebvre studied her a moment longer. "Most would have hidden after such public intensity. You did the opposite." "Art doesn't hide," Ava replied softly. "It provokes. It breathes." The older woman's lips curved faintly. "Good answer. Show me what you've brought." The proposal unfolded like confession. Ava spoke of rebirth and reclamation, of how the world's obsession with women's downfall could be turned into its opposite, a study in endurance. Her concept revolved around three central installations: the shattered self, resurgence, and becoming. Each would mirror a stage of transformation, fragmentation, reclamation, and transcendence. Lefebvre listened in silence, her eyes never leaving Ava's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured but warm. "Your work does not ask for pity. It demands recognition." Ava inclined her head. "That's the point." The deal was sealed. The Louvre would host her exhibition, the same institution that once deemed her Too modern, too emotional, too American. Now it was hers. Dash dash. News of the partnership broke within hours. Ava Monroe curates for the Louvre. From scandal to sovereignty. The kiss that created an icon. The same media that once dissected her tears now glorified her strength. But Ava read none of it. She'd learned that headlines were temporary things, like storm clouds that always found someone new to hover over. What mattered was the art. Dash dash. Months of work followed. Sketches, models, meetings with artists from across the globe. Ava poured herself into it like it was prayer. She collaborated with sculptors who worked with recycled steel, photographers who captured survivors' portraits, painters who turned pain into color. In a quiet moment, Ethan visited the studio. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her pace between canvases, barefoot and splattered with paint. "You look," he began, searching for the word. "Possessed," she teased. "Alive," he said. She stopped, looked at him and smiled. "Same thing." He walked closer, his voice softening. "You're not running from the past anymore, are you?" Ava shook her head. "No, I'm using it. Every wound, every whisper, every ruined night, they've all become material." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then you've already won." Dash, dash. When the exhibition finally opened, the line outside the Louvre stretched for blocks. Critics called it a manifesto disguised as art. Visitors wept openly in front of her installations, leaving notes folded into cracks of the mirrored walls like prayers. The shattered self greeted guests first, a corridor of suspended glass shards that reflected distorted versions of whoever walked through it. Each piece whispered faint audio of women's voices, quotes from interviews, journals, confessions of loss and rebuilding. Resurgence came next, a sculpture of a phoenix-like figure carved not from marble, but from discarded metal, its wings half rusted, half gold. It glowed under soft white light, fragile and immortal at once. And finally, becoming, a vast, minimalist space of silence and reflection. Visitors walked barefoot on a floor of dark glass that mirrored them perfectly, forcing each to see themselves as both artwork and observer. At the center of that room stood a plaque that read, "We are not made new by perfection, but by the fragments we choose to honor." Dash, dash. The exhibition was more than a success. It was a phenomenon. Journalists who had once written her downfall now called her the curator who turned pain into prophecy. But for Ava, the real victory wasn't the applause. It was watching other women in the gallery, young, old, scarred, radiant, see themselves in the art and stand taller. That was what she had wanted all along. Not forgiveness, not fame, transformation. Dash, dash. Late one night, after the crowds had gone and the museum stood in silence, Ava walked through her exhibition alone. The lights dimmed to a golden hush. The phoenix sculpture shimmered faintly, its metal feathers catching the last breath of electricity. She traced her fingers along the cool surface, whispering to the ghosts that had once haunted her. "You're free now," she said. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Ethan again, as if drawn by instinct. "I knew I'd find you here," he said quietly. She smiled without turning. "Of course you did." He came closer, stopping beside her. "You changed everything, Ava." She shook her head. "I didn't change it. I just told the truth, and the truth did the rest." They stood there together, the two of them reflected in the glass floor, fractured but whole. Outside, Paris slept. Inside, Ava Monroe's name was carved into history, not as a scandal, not as a symbol, but as something far rarer. A voice that had survived being silenced. A woman who had rebuilt not just her story, but the way stories were told. The world had written her narrative once. Now, she was writing its new one. Paris had finally gone quiet. The frenzy around Ava's exhibition had burned through the city like wildfire, leaving behind only the faint hum of awe and aftershock. The headlines had moved on, the cameras had dimmed, and the world, always hungry for new stories, had turned its gaze elsewhere. But not him. Ethan Hale had disappeared after the opening night. No message, no explanation, only silence. At first, Ava didn't notice. She was drowning in congratulations, interviews, gallery offers. But as the noise faded, she began to feel the outline of his absence, like the faint imprint left on a pillow long after someone's gone. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had built this new life for herself, by herself. And yet, when she walked past the cafe where they'd once talked for hours, or crossed the bridge where he'd first told her, "You don't have to be seen to be real," her chest tightened. She had learned to live without Julian's shadow. But the space Ethan left behind wasn't darkness. It was light, missing, but unforgettable. It was early autumn when he returned. Ava was in the courtyard of her apartment, pruning the ivy that crawled along the stone walls. The air carried that strange Parisian melancholy, a mix of decay and beauty. A familiar voice broke through it. "I never thought I'd find you standing still." She turned. Ethan stood by the gate, hands in his pockets, eyes the same steady calm she remembered. He looked different, tired maybe, but there was something new in his expression too. Something weighted. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "You vanished." He smiled faintly. "I didn't vanish. I went chasing ghosts." Ava arched a brow. "That's what you call leaving without a word now?" He hesitated, then stepped closer. "You remember that collection I told you about? The stolen African artifacts, the pieces hidden away in private vaults?" "Of course." "I found one," he said quietly, "in London, and another in Morocco. I've been working with a restoration foundation to return them home." Ava's irritation softened into something like awe. "You disappeared to bring back lost art." He nodded. "I guess I'm consistent that way." Their eyes met, and suddenly, all the unspoken months between them collapsed. They walked to a cafe near the river, the same one they had gone to that first night after the gala. Nothing had changed except them. The waiter recognized Ava instantly but pretended not to. Paris had learned to respect her quiet. As they sat across from each other, Ethan studied her the way he might study a masterpiece. Not to possess it, but to understand how it survived. "You look different," he said. "Lighter." Ava smiled. "Maybe I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine." He stirred his coffee. "And what's next for you?" "Rest," she said. "For once, I don't want to chase anything. I just want to exist." Ethan looked thoughtful. "Do you ever think about going back?" "Chicago, the gallery, your old world." She shook her head slowly. "That life died the night I kissed a stranger." He smiled at that, the corners of his eyes softening. "Then I guess I should say thank you. That kiss changed my life too." Ava tilted her head. "How so?" "It reminded me that sometimes the most beautiful moments come from chaos. You taught me that imperfection can be sacred." Her gaze flickered down to her hands. "I didn't mean to teach anyone anything that night. I was just trying to breathe." "And yet," he said, "you gave everyone else permission to." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the Marais district, their conversation effortless, their silences even more so. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something rarer, a connection tempered by distance and time, forged in mutual understanding. As twilight settled, Ethan stopped by the edge of the Seine. "I leave for Ghana next week," he said. "The Foundation's next project is there. But before I go, I wanted to see you, to make sure." "To make sure what?" Ava asked. He hesitated. "That you're not just surviving anymore, that you're really living." Ava's voice softened. "And what if I said I was still figuring out how?" "Then I'd say you're already doing it right." A single tear escaped before she could stop it. She wasn't sad. It was just hearing truth spoken so simply after years of manipulation felt disarming. Ethan reached out, brushing the tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. "You don't need saving, Ava. You never did. But maybe you deserve someone who sees you clearly." For a moment, the world stilled. The river moved quietly below, the city glowing gold above them. "I do see you," Ava said finally. "Too clearly, maybe." He smiled. "Then you know why I had to go." "I do," she whispered. "But you came back. That's what matters." He nodded. "For now. And when I leave again, I'll carry this with me. The version of you that's finally free." She swallowed, the words trembling in her chest. "You talk like a man who doesn't plan to stay." "Maybe I don't," he admitted. "But not all stories need permanence. Some are meant to pass through us, leave something behind, then move on." Ava looked at him, eyes bright. "And what did I leave behind?" He smiled, slow and genuine. Proof that beauty can come from fire. That night, Ava returned to her apartment and sat at her desk overlooking the courtyard. She opened her journal and wrote one line. He came back, not to stay, but to remind me that not all love is about possession. Some love simply witnesses us becoming. Outside, the wind moved through the ivy, whispering against the glass. The city pulsed softly below, eternal and restless. Ava closed her journal and leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile finding her lips. For once, she didn't feel haunted by absence. Ethan's return wasn't a promise, it was a punctuation. A gentle reminder that her story no longer needed saving or symmetry. The stranger had returned, and in doing so, he'd given her the rarest gift of all. The realization that she was already whole. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of Notre Dame began to toll. Ava rose, watching their faint echo ripple through the night. The woman who once lived for applause now lived for silence, for stillness, for truth. And as she turned off the lamp and let the darkness embrace her, she understood something she never had before. Not every love story is meant to last. Some are simply meant to awaken the part of you that finally learns to live. Paris was dressed in gold that evening, the kind of sunset that felt staged, deliberate, as though the universe itself was setting a scene. Ava Monroe sat in the Louvre's garden courtyard, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. The exhibition Resurgence had closed weeks ago, but the echoes of it still lingered. Her name whispered in galleries from New York to Tokyo, her image still circulating across digital timelines like an unfinished myth. She had built her piece carefully, like scaffolding around a fragile cathedral. And just when she started to believe in its permanence, the test arrived. Ethan returned from Ghana earlier than expected. He appeared at her apartment unannounced, rain-soaked and smiling, a man carrying both exhaustion and sunlight. "I should have called," he said, his voice warm. "But I wanted to surprise you." Ava laughed softly, her chest tightening. "You succeeded." They spent the night talking on her balcony, the city alive beneath them. Ethan told her about the restoration work, how he'd helped recover ancient masks stolen during colonial occupation, how he'd watched elders cry as they touched the art of their ancestors again. Ava listened, mesmerized. She had missed the way his words painted the world with reverence. When he finally paused, she said quietly, "You always seem to find beauty in what's been taken." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "That's why I found you." The moment hung between them, delicate and dangerous. The air around them hummed, not with lust, but with recognition. The next morning, he kissed her for the first time. It wasn't dramatic like that night at the gala, when pain had made her reckless. This one was quiet, intentional, the kind of kiss that didn't take, it gave. For the first time in years, Ava let herself fall without fear of breaking. But peace, she would soon learn, has a short half-life. 3 days later, she received the message, an email from a journalist at Le Monde. "Ms. Monroe, we're preparing an expose concerning the Hale Foundation's acquisition practices. Sources allege that Ethan Hale has been purchasing artifacts through illicit channels under the guise of repatriation. Would you like to comment?" The words blurred on the screen. Ava read them again and again. "Ethan?" She wanted to laugh, to delete the message, to dismiss it as a mistake. But the part of her that had lived through betrayal, the woman forged in marble corridors and scandals, refused to ignore it. She sent a reply. "I'll need to see your evidence. That evening, Ethan arrived at her apartment, unaware of the storm brewing behind her calm expression. He kissed her cheek, poured 2 glasses of wine, and began talking about plans for a new cultural partnership in Florence. His voice was animated, his eyes alight. Ava let him speak. Let him fill the air with warmth until the silence between words grew too heavy. Finally, she set her glass down. "Ethan, I got an email today." He paused mid-sentence. "From who?" "Le Monde. They're accusing the foundation of illegal acquisitions, of laundering art under the pretext of restoration." The room seemed to exhale. Ethan's expression didn't crumble, but it shifted, subtly. "They're wrong," he said finally. "They don't understand how these processes work. Half the archives we access are gray market deals. It's complicated." Complicated. she repeated. The word felt poisonous. He stepped closer. Ava, look at me. You know what I stand for. She met his eyes, searching for the same steady honesty she'd always found there. But something was different. Too measured, too careful. Do you have anything to hide? She asked softly. No, he said, too quickly. Then why? She whispered. Does it sound like you're lying to protect something? Ethan exhaled, his voice low. Because sometimes truth doesn't survive the world's simplicity. They want villains and heroes, but reality lives in the gray. Ava's hands trembled. That's what Julian said. Right before he destroyed me, the silence that followed was merciless. Ethan looked away, then back at her, his voice almost breaking. I'm not him. I want to believe that, she said, but belief doesn't erase proof. He nodded, jaw tight. Then see the proof yourself. They spent the next 2 days in London, meeting with his contacts. She watched him argue with museum officials, negotiate with lawyers, and present documents that traced every transaction the foundation made. Most of it was legitimate, some of it less so. There were gray areas, pieces bought from private dealers whose records vanished after the sale, shipments rerouted under false classifications to bypass taxes. Ethan didn't deny it. If we didn't take those risks, he said, those pieces would never see the light again. They'd rot in vaults owned by men who bought them with blood money. And what makes you different from them? Ava asked quietly. His answer was a whisper. Intent, . That night, they argued in a hotel overlooking the Thames. You can't save the world by breaking it, she said. You can't claim to restore what you steal. Ethan's voice cracked with frustration. And what about you, Ava? You turned your pain into art, your scandal into power. Did you ask permission from the people you used to tell your story? The words hit like a slap. He saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes and instantly regretted it. I didn't mean, yes, you did, she said quietly. They stood in silence, the rain outside blurring the city lights. Ethan took a step toward her, his voice softer now. We both built something from chaos. The only difference is, you found peace in your truth. I'm still searching for mine. Ava's breath trembled. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe truth isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you refuse to run from. He left before dawn. No goodbye, no promise. Just the soft click of the door and the faint scent of rain in his wake. Ava sat on the windowsill as the sky lightened, her reflection ghostly against the glass. She realized then that love wasn't the test. Truth was. The truth of who we are when no one is watching. The truth of what we choose when the cost of honesty is everything. Ethan had chosen his cause, and Ava, once again, was left with silence. But this time, it didn't break her. It clarified her. She looked out at the dawn, the city slowly coming alive, and whispered to herself, some truths don't destroy us. They simply reveal what was never meant to stay. By the time the sun rose, Ava had already begun sketching again. The title of her next exhibition came to her as if whispered by fate itself. The Anatomy of Truth. It wouldn't be about love or betrayal or even art. It would be about what survives once the illusions are stripped away. And for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch from the test. She welcomed it. Winter in Paris came softly that year. Muted skies, pale mornings, and a kind of silence that seemed to settle in the bones. The city was still beautiful, but quieter now, as if it too had grown tired of its own reflection. Ava Monroe had learned to live in that quiet. She no longer sought noise or applause or even clarity. She painted again, though her work had changed. Gone were the grand, symmetrical pieces that once impressed galleries. What replaced them were raw, imperfect canvases, blurred edges, half-finished brushstrokes, textures that carried pain like fingerprints. It wasn't about mastery anymore. It was about honesty. Her studio smelled of turpentine and rain. Every morning she opened the windows wide, letting the cold air wash over the scent of creation. On the walls hung fragments of her new exhibition, The Anatomy of Truth. It was meant to be small, intimate, almost private. A collection of pieces born not from performance, but from quiet confrontation. Each painting told a story of something reclaimed, self, voice, dignity. But beneath her calm, a restlessness stirred. Because even as she painted, Ethan's shadow lingered, not as an ache, but as an unfinished sentence. She had not heard from him since London. Rumors swirled about his foundation. Some hailed him as a hero returning sacred art to its rightful owners. Others painted him as a thief cloaked in virtue. Ava didn't know which version was true. Perhaps both were. Perhaps that was the problem with men who believed too deeply in purpose. They could justify anything, even betrayal. The day the letter came, Paris was wrapped in fog. It was delivered by hand, an envelope with her name scrawled in ink she recognized instantly. She stood by the window for a long time before opening it, her breath shallow. Ava, by the time you read this, I'll be gone again. The truth you asked for. I've spent months trying to live it. You were right. I crossed lines. I thought I was saving what mattered, but I only blurred what was sacred. The foundation has dissolved. The artifacts are being returned. The cost was high. But for the first time, I feel clean. If I could see you again, I'd tell you this. You taught me that restoration isn't about reclaiming the past. It's about facing what you broke and learning how to hold it gently. You are the only piece I ever tried not to possess. Ethan. She read it 3 times, each slower than the last, until the words began to blur. Then she folded it carefully and set it beside her easel, her hand trembling not with grief, but release. Ethan had chosen truth, and in doing so, he had given her permission to choose peace. Weeks later, the Anatomy of Truth opened in a modest warehouse space along the Seine. There were no red carpets, no champagne flutes, no journalists whispering about her dress. It wasn't that kind of exhibition. Visitors entered through a narrow corridor lined with mirrors, each fractured, reflecting not whole faces but fragments of them. At the end of the hall, a single plaque read, "To reclaim yourself, you must first face what you refuse to see." The centerpiece of the exhibit stopped everyone cold. It was a mixed media installation called Reclamation. A tall frame stood in the center of the room, filled with shards of broken glass, layered over a painting of a woman standing in a storm. Behind the glass, the faint reflection of the viewer merged with hers. 2 figures, one scarred, one whole, inseparable. Beneath it, a note in Ava's handwriting read, "Forgiveness is not for those who hurt you. It's for the part of you that believed you deserved it." The crowd moved slowly through the exhibit, some silent, some crying. Ava watched from the corner, unnoticed, her hands tucked into her coat. She no longer needed to be the center of her own narrative. She was content to witness it unfold in others. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, she stood before Reclamation alone. The glass caught the faint glimmer of the moon, scattering it like memory. For a moment, she imagined Ethan there beside her, not as a ghost or a regret, but as a reflection of everything they had both learned the hard way. He had taught her that truth wasn't about being right. It was about being real. Later that night, she walked along the river, her reflection trailing beside her in the dark water. Snow began to fall, soft, slow, dissolving on the surface before it could settle. She thought of the girl she had once been, the one who stood in a marble corridor and watched her life collapse in silence. That girl had broken, but she hadn't vanished. She had simply been waiting to be reclaimed. Ava smiled faintly. "You made it," she whispered to her reflection. The city's lights shimmered like constellations, and for the first time, she didn't feel small beneath them. She felt aligned. Months passed. The exhibition grew quietly famous, not for scandal, but for its truth. People came from around the world, not to see Ava Monroe, but to find pieces of themselves in her art. And one evening, as she was closing the gallery, she found something at the door. A small wooden box. No note, no signature. Inside lay a single object, an antique key, delicate and golden, engraved with 2 words. "We returned it." She didn't need to ask who had sent it. Ava held it in her palm, feeling the cool weight of it. The key wasn't a gift. It was a symbol. A circle closing. A story completing itself. That night, she hung it on the wall beside Reclamation, beneath a small brass tag that read simply, "Closure is not the end. It's the moment you stop seeking permission to begin again. The next morning, the sun rose over Paris like a quiet promise. Ava stood at her window, light spilling across her hands. The world outside was the same, but she wasn't. She had reclaimed her art, her voice, herself, and in doing so, she understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not love, not forgiveness, not even redemption, but home, the kind that lives within your own skin. As the city awakened, Ava returned to her easel. A new canvas waited, blank and unafraid. And for the first time in years, she didn't wonder what came next. She simply began. It began, as endings often do, with silence. The kind of silence that hums with memory, the echo of footsteps in an empty gallery, the faint rustle of paint drying, the heartbeat of a story finally exhaling. Ava Monroe stood alone in her studio as dawn unfolded across Paris. Pale light spilled through the tall windows, brushing against her canvases, kissing the gold key that hung beside Reclamation. Outside, the city stirred awake, unaware that inside a woman was standing at the threshold of her own becoming. She had lived 1,000 lives within this one. The curator who loved too carefully, the woman who burned in the spotlight of betrayal, the scandal that refused to stay silent, and now, the artist who had learned that ashes could glow. Ava walked slowly through her studio, her fingertips grazing each canvas. Each was a fragment of her: anger, grief, forgiveness, love. Every piece had demanded a price, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was collecting wounds. She was collecting wisdom. She paused before a half-finished painting, the silhouette of a woman standing in firelight. The brushstrokes were raw, alive, untamed. Ethan's words came back to her. Restoration isn't about reclaiming the past. It's about facing what you broke and learning how to hold it gently. He had returned what was stolen. She had reclaimed what was lost. Their paths had diverged, but their truths had met in the middle, where art and honesty intertwined. Weeks later, the final showing of The Anatomy of Truth opened to a packed hall. Critics, artists, students, strangers. They filled the space until there was no room left for pretense. Ava didn't give a speech. She simply stood by the door, greeting people as they entered, her eyes warm, her presence grounded. The crowd moved through the exhibition in reverent silence. Some stopped to weep before Reclamation. Others smiled quietly at the smaller sketches, portraits of faceless women rising from smoke. At the end of the gallery, a new edition hung on the wall. It was unlike anything she'd ever painted. A single canvas, luminous, almost blinding in its simplicity. Shades of white, silver, and gold blending into one another. The plaque beneath it read, "The light beneath the ashes. We are not what burned. We are what remains bright after the fire." People stood before it for long minutes, silent, undone. Some saw grief, others saw rebirth, but everyone felt something that words couldn't reach. A quiet knowing that no ruin is final if you have the courage to see beauty in the embers. That night, after the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Ava stayed behind. She walked once more through the gallery, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. At Reclamation, she stopped. The gold key still hung beside it, catching the faint glow from the emergency lights. She reached out, touching it gently, feeling its chill, its history, its weight. And then she smiled. For the first time, she understood that her story had never been about loss or revenge or even love. It had been about illumination, about finding light in places no one thought to look. Outside, snow began to fall, silent, endless, forgiving. Ava stepped out into it, pulling her coat tighter, watching as the flakes melted against her palms. Each one was fragile, temporary, perfect. In another life, she might have mourned how easily beauty disappeared, but not tonight. Tonight she understood. Beauty didn't vanish, it transformed. Somewhere, Ethan was walking through another city, perhaps under another storm. Maybe he would see the same kind of snow and think of her. Maybe he wouldn't. It no longer mattered. He had given her a truth that would never leave her, and she, in turn, had become her own light. Months later, Ava released her final collection, an autobiographical art film blending painting, poetry, and sound. It opened with her voice, soft and unshaken. "We all burn. Some from betrayal, some from loss, some simply from living too loudly. But if you're patient, if you let the fire teach you, you'll see what's left behind isn't ruin. It's gold dust, proof that you survived your own becoming. The film went viral within days. Millions watched it, not for spectacle, but for resonance. Her story, once scandal, once sorrow, had become something universal. A mirror for anyone who had ever lost themselves in the fire and still dared to rise. Dash, dash. And so, Ava Monroe faded quietly from the headlines, but burned brighter in the hearts of those who found themselves through her art. She no longer chased legacy. She embodied it. Every piece she created from then on carried a single signature, written not in ink, but in intention. Ava Monroe, Resurgence. Dash, dash. In her final journal entry, she wrote, "We spend so much of life trying to be unbroken. But what if the cracks are the invitation? What if the light only ever finds us through the places we once shattered?" Dash, dash. The world will remember her as the woman who turned scandal into symphony, ruin into radiance. But to those who truly listened, to those who stood in front of her art and felt the quiet pulse beneath it, Ava Monroe became something more, a testament, a reminder, a mirror for the brave. Because every life, no matter how burned, still carries light beneath the ashes. Dash, dash. And if you've ever stood in your own ruins, if you've ever felt the weight of endings pressing down and wondered whether you'd ever rise again, remember her story. Remember that you are not the fire that broke you. You are the flame that remains. So take this moment, yes, this one, and let it live beyond the screen. Share her light. Speak your truth. Follow what burns, not to destroy, but to become. Because somewhere inside you, beneath the ashes, the light is waiting, and it's already yours.